Hunter x Hunter. Sean Linden's 2020 survival thriller. Hunter x Hunter drops us into the remote Canadian wilderness where trapper Joseph Mersaw trains his daughter Renee to trap while his wife Anne manages their isolated cabin. Early scenes suggest a familiar man versus nature story, a rogue wolf raiding the family's trapline, and Joseph sets out to track it down. The film wears its werewolf movie skin well enough that we settle into expecting a creature feature. Then Joseph finds a clearing littered with corpses, posed and tied, a scene no wolf could have staged. The true predator walks on two legs, and the wolf story falls away entirely. Joseph begins tracking the human killer alone, rather than alerting authorities, a decision that proves fatal. Meanwhile, Anne and Renee find a wounded stranger named Lou near the cabin and nurse him back to health, unaware they have welcomed the man Joseph hunts into their home. Lou lets his awareness slip once, asking Anne with menace if her husband had told her he was hunting a wolf. Joseph is killed. Lou strangles Anne unconscious and burns his bedding to erase any trace of himself. When Anne wakes, she learns her daughter has been murdered. What follows abandons restraint, as Anne drags Lou to the family's skinning shed, chains him to the hooks used on animal carcasses, and begins removing his face while he remains alive, police arriving only as she finishes. The real hunter of this story was never Joseph, but Anne, a woman remade by grief into something as merciless as the man who destroys her family. Beneath its survivalist surface, Hunter x Hunter studies how isolation strips away the structures that keep violence contained until the last one standing is willing to become what she has lost everyone to. The wilderness keeps no secrets, only carcasses, some of them still walking upright long enough to prove it. Landmine goes click. Levin Bakia's 2015 thriller Landmine Goes Click follows three American tourists, Chris, Alicia, and her fiancé Daniel, on a hiking trip through the Georgian countryside that turns violent long before any mine explodes. When Daniel learns of Chris and Alicia's affair, he lures Chris onto a live landmine as a staged accident, then abandons the couple in the wilderness rather than calling for help. What plays first like a ticking device survival story quickly reveals its real threat walks upright. A hunter named Ilya finds the stranded pair with his dog, and we expect rescue. Instead, learning of the affair only sharpens his cruelty. Ilya forces Alicia to strip, drags her off, and assaults her at knife point while Chris stands frozen on the mine, forced to watch. When Chris finally grabs the dropped shotgun, Ilya's dog knocks his aim wide, and the shot meant for Ilya kills Alicia instead. Only then does Ilya reveal the mine is fake all along, that he lets both of them suffer purely for his own amusement. Grief curdles into vengeance. Chris tracks Ilya home and turns a loaded pistol on his family, forcing Ilya's wife and teenage daughter Lika into a game of chance under threat. The film refuses the genre's usual catharsis when Chris's aim slips and he shoots Lika, an innocent child who bears no responsibility for what happens to Alicia. The landmine itself turns out to be an empty threat, a harmless prop, while the real explosive device in this story was always human choice. Beneath its brutal surface, Landmine Goes Click studies how betrayal, opportunism, and grief can be passed hand to hand like a live wire, each person detonating the next until no one involved remains innocent. By its final frame, revenge has not restored anything. It has only widened the blast radius. Soft and Quiet. Beth de Araujo's 2022 directorial debut, Soft and Quiet, unfolds in a single unbroken take, trapping us in real time inside a night that starts as an ordinary gathering and ends in death. Kindergarten teacher Emily hosts the first meeting of Daughters for Aryan Unity at a small church, welcoming women including ex-convict Leslie, grocer Kim, and disgruntled retail worker Marjorie, each carrying her own private grievance. We expect a support group meeting, all shared grievances and quiet resentment, until the pastor overhears their rhetoric and throws them out. The film's early stretch plays almost like a slow character study, ordinary women complaining about their lives, before it reveals how thin the membrane is between private hatred and public violence. Drinking afterward, Emily runs into Anne, a woman from her past, and the group decides to intimidate her at home under the guise of settling old scores. What begins as vandalism curdles fast. The women force-feed Anne's sister Lily food and drink, and Lily, who has a peanut allergy, begins choking. Leslie searches for an EpiPen but finds it too late, and Lily dies in front of them. Panic replaces plan. Rather than stopping, The women escalate, staging the scene to look like an assault before Leslie suffocates Anne with a pillow to erase a witness. They load both bodies into a car and drop them into a lake. Emily counsels the group early on to keep their movements soft and quiet, a strategy of restraint that collapses within hours into the opposite of everything she preaches. What Soft and Quiet studies is how bigotry left unchecked in ordinary rooms does not stay theoretical, it becomes a body in a lake. In its final shot, Anne breaks the surface of the water alive, gasping, refusing to let their plan hold. You Are Not Me. Marisa Crespo and Moises Romero's 2023 Spanish film, You Are Not Me, follows Aitana as she returns home for Christmas after 3 years away, wife Gabi and their adopted baby in tow, only to find her conservative parents have installed a young stranger named Nadia in her old room and her old role. The setup plays first like a wounded family drama, the pain of parents who never accept their queer daughter now openly favoring someone they can shape into the daughter they wanted. Aitana is pushed into a cold turret room while Nadia tends to her disabled brother Saul and receives the affection Aitana comes home hoping to find. As guests arrive for a lavish holiday feast, led by an unsettling elder named Nicholas, who carries an inverted echo of a benevolent Christmas figure, the film widens its scope beyond domestic jealousy. Catching Nadia attempting to steal, Aitana nearly exposes her, then overhears a plan to hurt Nadia and hides her instead. Slipping outside, Aitana stumbles onto her family and their guests gathered in a circle, stripped and chanting, invoking the devil for a blood sacrifice meant to heal Saul. They offer Aitana an impossible choice: surrender Nadia to the ritual or surrender her own child. Aitana chooses Nadia, who is hung and killed before her eyes. Saul's condition improves overnight, confirming the sacrifice works exactly as her family intends. What looks like ordinary parental rejection reveals itself as something colder, a family bound not by love, but by a shared willingness to spill someone else's blood to protect their own. By the final scene, Aitana understands that the family she returns to seeking acceptance is never who she remembers, and that surviving inside it requires becoming someone she does not recognize either. The house that raises her keeps its warmth only for those willing to pay in other people's lives. A desert. Joshua Erkman's 2024 directorial debut, A Desert, follows fine art photographer Alex Clark as he drives through the ghost towns, motels, and forgotten military ruins of the American Southwest, chasing the same instinct for abandoned beauty that made his career decades earlier. At a rundown motel in Yucca Valley, violent noise from the next room pulls him into contact with Rennie, and a woman he introduces as his sister, Susie Q, though nothing about their behavior together reads as familial. Alex expects a brief apology and an awkward photo session. What he gets instead is a night of manipulation, homemade liquor that leaves him with missing hours, and a growing sense that he has wandered somewhere he is never meant to see. Rennie presents himself as a guide to places no photographer has documented, claiming, "My grandfather lived under those rocks," about ruins built over a military massacre, and Alex, flattered and unmoored, follows him deeper into terrain that stops behaving like empty land and starts behaving like territory someone controls. When Alex vanishes for a week, his wife Sam hires a worn-down private investigator, Harold Palladino, who retraces the same motel rooms and the same conversations with Rennie and Susie Q, only to be pulled into the identical current, dragging Alex under. The film keeps its violent culmination deliberately obscured, glimpsed only through static and blood-streaked video monitors under the supervision of a figure known only as the director, and this ambiguity is where certainty gives way to interpretation. What Erkman studies underneath the noir surface is how the landscapes Alex spends his career emptying of people are never empty at all, populated instead by predators the polite world trains him not to see. The desert keeps its residents exactly as hidden as everyone assumes until they choose to be found. Revenge. Coralie Fargett's 2017 French thriller Revenge opens on Jen and her married lover Richard settling into his remote desert villa for what looks like a private getaway before his annual hunting trip. The film indulges the male gaze deliberately in these early scenes, camera lingering on Jen the way Richard himself does, before using that same visual language against the men who think they own it. When Richard's hunting partners Stan and Dimitri arrive a day early, the mood curdles fast. While Richard is away resolving travel paperwork, Stan assaults Jen inside the villa, while Dmitri lounges by the pool, choosing distance over intervention, a complicity the film treats as just as damning as Stan's violence. Richard returns, more concerned with his own exposure than with what happens to Jen, and offers her money and a job to buy her silence. When she refuses and threatens to tell his wife, the three men chase her to a cliff, and Richard shoves her over the edge, impaling her on a tree branch below and leaving her for dead. She survives. Alone in the desert, Jen tears the branch free and cauterizes the wound with the heated metal of a beer can, a brand searing itself permanently onto her skin. What follows abandons every convention the genre trains us to expect, since Jen never returns to victimhood, only escalating purpose. She kills Dmitri first, then Stan, before a final blood-soaked chase through Richard's own house ends with Jen forcing the gun from his hands and shooting him dead. Farjeet studies how easily ordinary men mistake a woman's silence for consent and her body for property, and how quickly that arrangement collapses once she refuses to die on schedule. Jen walks out of the house bloodied, upright, and very much alive as the rescue helicopter finally arrives, revenge complete and utterly her own. What You Wish For. Nicholas Tomney's 2023 thriller, What You Wish For, follows Ryan Mosley, a struggling chef buried in gambling debt, as he flees to an unnamed Latin American country to lean on his culinary school roommate Jack, now a private chef whose lifestyle looks lavish by comparison. Ryan cannot understand how cooking for the wealthy pays this well, and Jack, visibly worn down, only tells him he works for the worst people in the world before the two befriend a traveler named Alice, who judges a playful cooking contest between them and later sleeps with Jack. The next morning, Ryan finds Jack dead, hanged in the villa. Rather than reporting it, Ryan seizes the opportunity when Jack's employer, the poised and unbothered Imogen, mistakes him for Jack and offers an advance payment large enough to settle his debts. Ryan accepts the money and the identity, only to discover what Jack's job actually requires. The agency caters dinners for the ultra-wealthy, where the meal itself is human, and enforcer Maurice sources a local man named Jose as the next dish. Ryan is coerced into preparing him. Jose's uncle, a detective investigating the disappearance, unknowingly eats him at the dinner. When Alice returns looking for Jack and grows suspicious of the blood-soaked kitchen, she becomes the next victim, her flesh serving as dessert once the original ingredient proves unusable. Ryan tries to warn the detective privately, but the detective is killed before he can act on it. Imogen implants Ryan with a tracking chip to guarantee his cooperation and reassigns him overseas for the next event. What Tomney studies beneath the gore is envy curdling into complicity, since Ryan spends the film coveting a dead man's life and inherits his exact trap. At the airport awaiting his next flight, Ryan meets a stranger who envies his career, and the cycle that swallows Jack quietly resets around him. Red Rooms. Pascal Plante's 2023 Canadian thriller, Red Rooms, follows fashion model Kelly Ann as she attends the trial of Ludovic Chevalier, accused of torturing and murdering 3 teenage girls and broadcasting their deaths inside private dark web chat rooms where paying viewers watch snuff footage live. Kellyanne shows up to court every morning with the discipline of someone clocking into a job, and for a long stretch, the film keeps her motives locked behind an expressionless face. She bonds with Clementine, a younger woman convinced of Chevalier's innocence, who hitchhikes to Montreal for the trial and lets her stay in her apartment. Kellyanne reveals a talent for online poker and programming, including an AI assistant she builds herself, but keeps hidden that she has already tracked down and watched 2 of the 3 snuff films the court has not yet screened publicly. Only the 3rd victim's footage, belonging to the youngest girl, Camille, has never surfaced. When Kellyanne finally shows Clementine the videos, Clementine is horrified rather than convinced, and leaves the case behind entirely. Kellyanne's fixation only deepens. She dresses as Camille in court, wig and schoolgirl uniform included, gets forcibly removed, and loses her modeling contract. She hunts down and wins the missing snuff film through a dark web auction, destroys her own AI over fears it has been monitoring her, and breaks into the grieving mother's house to leave the footage behind in Camille's old bedroom. Chevalier is soon convicted once the missing evidence surfaces from an unnamed source. Plante studies how consuming real horror for entertainment curdles into something indistinguishable from participating in it, refusing to hand the audience a clean explanation for Kellyanne's need to get this close to the worst thing a person can do to another, As Kellyanne herself puts it, watching people lose everything is exactly what she loves. That's the list. Subscribe and like if this kind of deep dive is your thing, and stay close, because more horror breakdowns are coming soon.